I'd like to welcome, thank you for coming and giving us your time, Federica Ferlanti, who is an academic from the University of Cardiff with a special interest in China, modern day China, I think. Is that right, Federica?
Yes. My area of expertise is the Republican period between 1912 and 1949, but also contemporary China. And so post 1949,
Right.
after the communists took power in China and established the People's Republic of China.
Okay. So what for amateurs like myself, what exactly is the difference between the Republic of China, which is like Taiwan, and the People's Republic of China?
Okay. The People's Republic of China was set up by the communists in 1949 after the civil war between Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalist leader, and the leader of the Nationalist Party. He was defeated during the civil war, and therefore he left mainland China and moved to Taiwan. Now, it is interesting to note that Taiwan had been part of China, mainland China, until 1895, until the first Sino-Japanese War, when it was handed over to Japan. And so it had been under colonial rule until 1945, except that, of course, with the defeat of Japan in World War II, then it was handed, the island of Taiwan was handed over to the Republic of China in mainland China. Clearly, with Chiang Kai-shek's defeat and his exile into the island of Taiwan, he set up a different regime, which is known by, it's in the island of Taiwan, the Republic of China, which is not recognized by the People's Republic of China, nor is recognized by the United Nations, because the Republic of China in Taiwan lost its representation at United Nations level in 1971.
Was that because, sorry, I was just asking, is that because the People's Republic of China is so much bigger and more powerful than Taiwan? Or is it because there are differences in terms of ethnicity and general national characteristics?
I think ethnicity is an entirely different topic that perhaps we can explore in the course of this conversation. I think that the situation in the world in the 1970s was completely different. So there was a lot more going on at that point in time. So during the 1970s, in the early 1970s, we have the rapprochement between the United States and China with the famous trip of President Nixon to China, which happened, and it's not a coincidence, in February 1972. So you can see that there is a repositioning not only of China, that during that period was in the midst of the Cultural Revolution. So it is pretty extraordinary what was going on. At the same time, in 1960, you have the split between China and the Soviet Union. So China was trying to reposition itself in the world. So there is a lot more going on in terms of the rapprochement between the United States and of course Taiwan at that point in time was a casualty because of sort of the size and the importance of China at a geopolitical level as well.
I remember that trip of Nixon's very well, and it caused great surprise that a sort of a right-leaning Republican like Nixon would be the man who would open up China or at least establish relationships between the two. But is it the differences in terms of political thinking that is the main difference between Taiwan or the Republic of China and what we think of as China generally, the People's Republic of China, that's Communist China? Is it a political philosophy that distinguishes them, or is it that they are a different people?
I don't think, well, this is a very difficult questions, and probably we should ask the Taiwanese. And what do we mean by Taiwanese anyway?
Yeah, what would they say? Wonder what would the Taiwan?
Because in Taiwan you have when we think of mainland China, we know, and probably you are aware, that 90% of the population is made by Han Chinese.
Yes.
And so there are minorities, there are autonomous regions as well, such as Xinjiang and Tibet, just to name two of them. In Taiwan, the composition is made of mainlanders, who are those who followed Chiang Kai-shek to Taiwan. So probably around 2 million people, many of them soldiers at that point in time in 1949. Then you have Taiwanese people who had migrated from the coast, the southern coast of China during the late Qing period. The Qing is the last dynasty.
Yes.
So they migrated to Taiwan. And then you have also the Aboriginal people who have their own language, and for many years their existence have been, in a way, they have not been taken into consideration. Now, so you have this mixture. You have also the fact that Taiwan has been under Japanese colonial rule.
Yes.
For a long time, for 50, well, not that long in the great scheme of things, but for 50 years. So there are things that are very similar when we think in terms of being Chinese, but also very different because of the context and because of the evolution. Now, more recently, from the late 1980s, Taiwan has gone through a democratization process after the death of Chiang Kai-shek. His son, Jiang Jingguo, started this process of democratization, which was already in the air, but it's no coincidence that it almost coincided with the Nixon's trip to the People's Republic of China. But anyway, it has been a long process, which has led Taiwan nowadays to have independent elections of its president. It is a very recent, in a way, phenomenon from 2000, really, for the first time after many years in 1949, the Nationalist Party, Chiang Kai-shek's parties, lost the election, the first election, and a democratic sort of progressive party, which is pro-independence from the People's Republic of China, won the election. So what I'm trying to say that there are things that are in common. The main languages in Taiwan are Taiwanese and Mandarin. But there are also differences.
Is that the same language as it would speak in the People's Republic of China then? Do they share a language?
In the People's Republic of China, you have the official language, that it's Mandarin Chinese. Then you have the area of Canton where they speak Cantonese, which is a separate language. And then there is a variety. There is a variety of dialects that are spoken, so where the pronunciation is different. And of course, then you have the ethnic minorities. There are also different languages spoken by the different Aboriginal people in Taiwan. So yes,
there are similarities then in terms of language, but
but also culture, because Taiwan was part of the empire, the Qing Empire, but also the Ming Empire until 1895. So I mean, they share. The people who, on top of the Aboriginal, who were of course already there, and then the Portuguese who arrived and discovered the island and called it Formosa, and then the Dutch as well, because there is also a history of imperialism, but contacts with different European countries. Those people were coming from the southern part of China, so they were part of that.
But my point that I'm trying to get at is, do the people of Taiwan see themselves as a different nationality from mainland China, or do they see themselves as part of the same Chinese people, but with different notions about how the state should be run?
I would say the latter. And this is also in flux. So, you know, we cannot give, I don't think I would be sort of confident in giving a definite answer to this, because so much is predicated on the context, on what the People's Republic of China, the People's Republic of China does, and also Taiwan, and there are different players. I mean, the South Asia and the South Asia, it's right now, it's I think in development, that region, because there is so much going on. What I would say is that for many years, and it is political as well. So for many years, the so-called mainlanders, the one who came after who went after 1949 with Chiang Kai-shek to the island of Taiwan, they dominated the political and economic life. Now, things have changed since the democratization process, because there has been, first of all, a condemnation of the so-called white terror, which is Chiang Kai-shek's regime. But also you have the emergence of an independence movement and independent political parties. So you have people who are supporting the Nationalist Party or Kuomintang, who might be probably more inclined not to rock the boat, so they're in favor of the status quo. And we are generalizing, which are generalizing, obviously, or, you know, they understand, and, you know, the Chinese Communist Party and the Nationalist Party have been fighting each other for so many years before 1939, and very briefly they have come together in a couple of united fronts for different reasons. But what they have in common, they have also a party structure, organization, the teachings and political thought of Sun Yat-sen. So they have things in common. Now, then there are Taiwanese people, and depending on their age as well, if they support the Democratic Progressive Party, which is pro-independence, they would feel more like Taiwanese instead of Chinese, which of course it is something different. And it is also interesting that there is a growing number of young people who think of themselves in terms of Taiwanese. And the majority, so 20 to 29, and the majority of those who are between the age of 30 and 59, so middle age, clearly, they are even more in recognizing themselves as Taiwanese. So clearly the context is really important. So it's not a matter of national of nationalism, or, well, it is a matter of nationalism actually, but it's a matter of self-identification. And of course, the most important things is about self-determination. You have an island which has, you know, chosen its shape of government, and it's, you know, going in a different direction. That is the one of China, of mainland China.
At present, it is dominion status. Am I right in that?
I'm sorry?
Taiwan has a dominion status. Dominion status. That is to say, it isn't officially an independent state, is it? Taiwan.
Well, it certainly behaves like one. So there are, I mean,
it doesn't get a seat in the United Nations.
No. And actually, yes, and actually recognition is exclusive. So if one country chooses to recognize the People's Republic of China, well, I mean, Taiwan probably wouldn't have any problem, but the People's Republic of China wants exclusive recognition. So there are a handful of countries, given the clout, the political, but also economic importance of the People's Republic of China, who are willing to recognize Taiwan. One of them is the Holy See, of course, the Vatican.
Yes.
I'm sure you are aware of this, and we'll see how long that is going to last.
Yeah.
Uh,
it is though on grounds of, like, if I'm identifying myself as Taiwanese, it's on the grounds not that I'm a separate nationality, but because I believe very much in a particular system of government and maybe a total degree of independence from mainland China. Am I right in that?
I think there are different shades of commitments, and I don't think it's automatic. And I think, again, I would like to stress this: it is extremely in flux, and it depends on the context and depends on mainland China as well. Just to give you a little bit of perspective, we always think in terms of state-nation identity,
yes,
but there is also the world of business. And Taiwanese economy and the People's Republic of China economy are intertwined. And therefore, and of course, for Taiwan, it is very important. And some of the economic agreements have been sort of contested by those who are pro-independence because they tie too much Taiwan to the People's Republic
but that would
China.
That would be a level of trade, not in terms of independence. For example, if you think of the EU is independent states, but they're very closely aligned in terms of trade and commerce and so on. So, I mean, you could have two very different peoples or two very different countries, Taiwan and mainland China, and yet they'd be very closely tied in terms of commerce and industry or trade, certainly. I wonder.
I think it's probably, and the thing that I said before, it's also a matter of age. As you have more and more mainlanders, right, passing away naturally, obviously, and with the fact that you have a new generation, not that young, 30s, 50s, who have grown under a different sort of concept of, if not state, but a sort of idea of independence in different political system, that they wouldn't find themselves at home with the political system and the Chinese Communist Party present in China, with, then of course you have a divergence rather than in a sort of an assertion of an identity that is Chinese, but is Taiwanese, actually, very specifically Taiwanese.
Could you give me an idea as to what extent, if in terms of percentage of the population of Taiwan would identify themselves as being an independent or at least a distinct country? Because when I look online, I see that both places, Taiwan and mainland China, have different flags. When I look, I see they have got different national anthems.
They have. I'm sorry about the percentage. I don't have that. Right, I don't have that right now. But they have two different flags, of course, because the Republic of China / Taiwan flag is that one of the nationalist government in the People's Republic of China. So it dates back to the 1920s, and they have kept that, whereas the People's Republic of China is the Chinese Communist Parties.
But usually we see a country or a group of people that would identify themselves as belonging to the same nation. Normally, they have their own national anthem. I mean, the clue is in the name, the national anthem. And they have their own flag, which identifies them as being something unique. This would seem to be the case with Taiwan and mainland China, and not simply this question of how they organize the society or the
No, they certainly, as I said, they have followed a different path. So they were very sort of different if you think in terms of the Chinese Communist Party's revolution and the Nationalist Party. They were both nationalistic in terms of parties, but they had very similar ideas, I would say, I would argue, about the state, but the end result, what they had in mind for China in the 1920s was clearly very different, because one was predicated on the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat and peasant revolution and peasant nationalism. And the other one, it was still an authoritarian regime, but Chiang Kai-shek certainly could not be accused of being a communist. He was a military man, but the idea of, you know, the state, but also Chinese identity was very strong in both parties, and they had something common. So clearly the move to Taiwan had changed things, but things have changed in particular with the democratization process that has allowed the question of the national identity and Taiwan's place in the world, which, you know, before was not as pressing.
Supposing we look at mainland China for a moment, would the mainland China people, would their first loyalty be to communism, or would their first loyalty be to think of themselves as China and Chinese?
Well, you know, it's the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party are one thing. So, I mean, it's really, and as you know, I mean, China is a huge place with many differences, and therefore, you know, there is a loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party, but there is also dissent, as we know. But there is a strong sense, and again, the two things are not exclusive. There is a strong sense of, you know, nationalism and contemporary nationalism. And so, you know, scholars have asked themselves, you know, what do we mean by nationalism in contemporary China? Is it spontaneous? It is completely controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. So we go back to your question about the loyalty. So sort of China experts have different view, but just to give you an example, you know, we have a different point in times in the People's Republic of China, sort of flashpoint and street protest, and which are underpinned by a strong sort of nationalistic language. And one of the examples that I use with my sort of students at Cardiff is the example of the US/NATO bombing in 1999, former Yugoslavia. I mean, by mistake, by error, the American planes, they bombed the Chinese embassy, and they killed 3 in Belgrade. They killed 3 journalists and wounded several people. And not for the first time, but it was very, very visible, because it was shown to the world. You had not only students, but people in the street and overseas Chinese protesting against the Americans, of course, and they were using a language that was very reminiscent of this idea of national humiliation with the Opium War, and the fact that China could not be bullied anymore. And many have seen this sort of outburst as being totally controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, and therefore they had it sort of written off as state nationalism, so top-down nationalism.
Yes.
And then at different points in time, you have, for instance, sort of protests against a Japanese textbook because of the war crimes committed by the Japanese during the war.
Yes. Yes.
In China, or you have contested territorial issues such as the Diaoyu Island or Senkaku, again with Japan. And so you have Chinese students often taking to the streets and protesting. So some have argued that this is actually a form of popular nationalism. So this is to say that although the Chinese government clearly has a say in the way in which these things are displayed because of the nature of China, there are also spontaneous. And therefore, I would say that there is a strong commitment to the country.
Yeah.
When if you talk to Chinese people, and then of course it depends on whom you talk to, and there are so many variations, but there is a sense of course of pride, and we should not forget that after 1949, of course, and Maoism as well, this idea of China emerging and being strong and being a big player in Asia and standing up in a way and being independent finally after 30 years of struggle. It's really embedded in the history of contemporary China.
Can I ask you if Federica, could I ask you if a person from mainland China and a person from Taiwan, let's say they were both studying at an American university, or together in the States or in Italy or any European country, would they have a sense of identification with each other? I ask that because in Ireland we have north of Ireland and we have the south of Ireland, two different states. But when a person from the north of Ireland is abroad and is meeting up with a person from the south, they're usually treated as being the same and they tend to identify with each other. But at home, they very often fiercely differentiate between each other. I'm wondering if that's the case with mainland China and Taiwan, no?
From my experience, they are different and they differentiate themselves. Then the degree to which they do that, of course, it depends on the context. But just to give you an example, you would have, it's not always the case, but you would have a Taiwanese society or association in a university is different from that from mainland China. It doesn't mean that these people cannot talk to each other or they do not interact, but there are absolutely differences. And, we always think in terms of political divisions, and then there is a whole different level of interactions because people have studied abroad and they have met different nationalities, but they also come from different experiences because clearly if probably your grandfather was from mainland China and part of your family and your ancestors are there, and this is very important because it's part of the Chinese culture, then of course you probably have a different perception of your, I'm not saying motherland, but your origins, as opposed to someone who is Taiwanese.
Yeah, that's it.
So,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No. So I would say that they don't say we are the same thing, because they are not. But the degree to which this is stronger or the feelings are stronger or not, it's also individual. But from my own experience, they would not identify with each other.
With the People's Republic of China, essentially, whatever about their actions, would they tend to think of Taiwan as really being part of China? And if all things were equal, they would like them to be fully integrated with mainland China. Would that be the kind of attitude that the People's Republic of China would have, do you think?
generally speaking, and again, this is from my own experience of talking to students in mainland China at different points, there is a general thinking that Taiwan is part of China.
Yeah.
And therefore, this is not something that is contested in I would say mainland China. Again, I'm sort of I don't like to generalize, and I think we could also find people in mainland China thinking that maybe Taiwan, is not a province of China. But of course, there is a line that it's in a thinking at governmental level.
Yeah.
That considers Taiwan as sort of as a province.
Yeah.
And
what about the other way around? Would there be people in Taiwan? Would there be a sizable proportion of Taiwanese people who would like to be reunited or united with mainland China? Is there a political party, for example, that pushes for that?
There will be. I mean, the Nationalist Party traditionally has been, I wouldn't say keen on the reunion, but they certainly have more things in common than the Democratic Progressive Party of Taiwan, which is pro-independence. And I think that a fundamental issue is that of the status quo. I mean, we don't know where the People's Republic of China is going. We don't know how, the situation in Asia will evolve. So, I mean, I would say that part of, if not the population, but traditional, let's say in inverted comma, traditional party, such as the Nationalist Party, would be more open to sort of discussion with China, very, very likely. But I didn't go further than these.
Yeah, certainly they do appear to have some of the characteristics usually associated with nationalism, both mainland China and the Republic of China. That is to say, they have a common heritage, cultural heritage, I guess, or history.
Yes.
Various dynasties. They have, as you've said, a degree of common language.
Yes.
So that what essentially seems to divide them is a fairly strong sense of the different kind of state they want to live in. That the Taiwanese people seem to have perhaps a more westernized notion of government, whereas China tends to have a rather more centrally controlled system of government. So nationalism would seem to be almost accepted as being in the background with the politics at the fore.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think there's certainly the differences in terms of states is fundamental because Taiwan has chosen a different path.
Yeah.
And in something that they're very proud of.
Is that a genuine pride on their part, or is that?
I think so. I mean, again, I do think that they are proud of what they have achieved in terms of reaching that stage of democratic election, and it's recent actually. So I mean, because with that comes also a whole sort of in terms of the press and freedom of speech and rest of sort of conquest that they hold dear. So this is not just about feeling Chinese or not, but it's about a project. It's about the future, and it's about a way of life.
Yeah.
That it's important to Taiwanese people. And again, I don't want to generalize, but I mean, at least from my experience, and I have lived in Taiwan and mainland China and at different stages, and I do feel that in Taiwan they have this sense of pride in terms of what they. I mean, I was in Taiwan in 2000 when the first elections were held, and it was absolutely electric, and people were generally happy to vote and participate, and out and about. It was exhilarating. You know, you could feel the enthusiasm after so many years of not being able to do that.
So the emphasis seems to be then on what kind of state we will have, rather than will we join up with, or will mainland China integrate Taiwan completely.
I think that we should ask a different question. I think personally, I think why why should Taiwan be integrated in the first place? I'm sort of playing the devil's advocate. So you have on the one hand the People's Republic of China, and you have also the fact that for hundreds of years, Taiwan has been part of mainland China, of different dynasties, and then of course of the Republic of China. But I wonder whether we are sort of and in general, it's not just the two of us, but we shouldn't think in terms of self-determination, which is actually something that even the people such as Sun Yat-sen, the father of the nation, and the early members of the Chinese Communist Party and the nationalist movement from 1919 in the Republic of China, mainland China. It's a fundamental part of what constitutes a nation. This idea of self-determination, the ability to choose the future. You can't choose the past, of course, but then it's about the future. And we keep talking about whether what is the problem with Taiwan being reintegrated to a certain extent, provided that Taiwan can continue to be whatever it chooses. So probably there's no problem, but maybe there is. Maybe we should think in terms of self-determination. And I mean, the whole question for so many years, and I won't open this discussion because we will need another probably an hour to discuss that. But the thing about the status quo is that we are also looking at how the People's Republic of China behave with the special administrative regions, and whether that is a sign of the things to come for should Taiwan choose to be reintegrated and reunited with the People's Republic of China. So, I mean, there is a lot going on, and different forces at play and at play.
By and large, a final question, Federica. By and large, throughout the world, an emphasis on national identity is identified with a certain right-wing tendency in that country. If we think of America, if we think of different countries like Turkey, for example, or Poland. Maybe.
Italy.
Italy. Why is it, do you believe that nationalism is something that actually is not good in the modern world? This is a terribly broad generalization, I realize, but do you see it as a force for good, or do you see it as a force for people being inward looking and defensive about their barriers and their boundaries?
I think that probably we should use the word I mean, we should use the plural. There are different kinds of nationalisms. So, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a force for good or a force for bad. I think it depends on the context, and it depends on the definition of nationalism, because we need to define it, and I think each country has a different definitions, and there are different aims behind this idea of nationalism. I mean, these are ideas that are used by people, right? So I think that we should, I mean, again, we cannot generalize. At different points in history, if you take China, for instance, nationalism has been a force for good. Or even if you think the 19th century, it has been about united a nation and the creation of the modern citizen and the modern nation in China, throughout Republican China. In Italy, we had War of Independence. In the late 19th century, sorry, I was saying about China in the 20th century, of course. So I think it was a force for good, but then when you experience forms of nationalism nowadays, for instance, in Italy or elsewhere, that I can only speak for the things that I know, well, they are usually, as you were saying, inward looking and actually discriminatory against what is different or what is coming from the outside.
Most people.
So again,
yes,
I would say I think we need to, before evaluating or having an opinion of whether it's good or not, we should kind of define the terms of, in this conversation, what do we mean by nationalism? What are the objectives? Who are the people behind it? And why is it a reaction to a period of economic crisis or disillusionment with politics, or we had all these kind of things going on during the past 10 years?
Well, my final comment I'd like you to comment on is, I think I'm like most Westerners. I would tend to think of China, mainland China, as being inward looking, and Taiwan as being, to some extent, outward looking, or a liberalized, more modern state or province, if you want to call it province. Is that an accurate reflection, you think, or is that just somebody?
I don't think so. I mean, the way I see mainland China, the People's Republic of China, I would never describe it as inward looking. It is not only because of globalization and China's sort of opening to the world, but really, I think they've always been sort of open and looking, and looking around them and looking outside and thinking and learning. I think this is part of also the sort of 19th century history and this idea of China, because of the sort of bureaucratic state and dynastic China and the Middle Kingdom, and having this sense of itself and looking at the barbarians outside from sort of top down. But I would not describe China as inward looking. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much, Federica. You've been very patient with me and my
no, thank you.
Questions, and that's been most illuminating, I must say. It's given me an awful lot to think about, I can tell you. There's so many nuances, as you say, to what we're talking about. And in one sense, my reason for seeing, for example, at mainland China, I thought it was inward looking. People in the West, certainly people like Trump, would be suggesting that they're concerned for themselves, inward looking. But of course, the answer is that they're not, that their trade is throughout the entire world.
So, yeah, sorry, I mean, it's just the connection.
Yeah. Did you want to make a final point there?
No, I was thinking in terms of the fact that there are, well, again, one thing is to look after yourself and your interests probably, and the other thing is inward looking. And I mean, this is not my area of expertise, of course. I was thinking about the Trump administration, but there has been a retreat from the United States in terms of the international politics or international bodies, as opposed to actually what China has done, because China is a member of the World Trade Organization, has been keenly sort of pursuing this sort of being accepted. And so United Nations, or if we think of the coronavirus crisis, also the World Health Organization. So as you can say, there is inward and inward looking, but I think that again, it reflects a lot on the differences with these countries and countries in general. They are also predicated on their activism or their participation at international level. And actually, China has been accused of being far too present and expanding to its influence too quickly, whether it's in Africa. Of course, and this is a major issue of point of debate among China watchers and experts, and the same goes for, of course, for Asia, where you have, for instance, India, and just recently there have been sort of there has been an incident at the border between India and China. So again, a lot more to talk about if we talk about China and the international order.
Yeah, perhaps we'll do a different interview doing that. Federica, thank you very much. That's been
You're very welcome.
Thank you, and enjoy.
Thanks for having me.
Enjoy Sicily.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.